Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2022 Levenger Lecture. My name is Ronald Baer. I'm the current interim dean of the Brown University School of Public Health. It is truly an honor to kick off the Levenger Lecture this year, especially during the year-long celebration of 50 years of medicine at Brown. Thank you all for coming, especially Dr. Victor Dzau, who will present today's Levenger Lecture. Before we start the lecture, I would like to provide a little background on the important history of this annual lecture. The Paul Levinger Professorship in the Economics of Healthcare is funded through an endowment established in 1987 to honor the memory of Paul Levinger. The gift was made by his wife, the late Ruth Levenger, their daughter, Bette Levenger, Cohen, and her husband, Dr. John Cohen, a pediatrician from the Brown class of 1959. Although the Cohens could not be with us today, they've been regular attendees of this series. Over the years, we sincerely thank them for their generosity and commitment to Brown University. Paul Levinger was the president and treasurer of the Spidell Corporation, a prominent watch and jewelry manufacturer here in Rhode Island. He was a member of the corporate boards of Rhode Island Hospital, the Beth Israel Hospital, and the Miriam Hospital, the Miriam Hospital. In 1969, Mr. Levenger received an honorary doctorate from Brown University. Mr. Levenger's Spidell building, located at 70 Ship Street, is now the home of the Laboratories for Molecular Medicine. The increasing complexities of healthcare economics make this lectureship especially important to both the School of Public Health and the Alfred Medical School. We are very grateful to be able to honor Mr. Levenger's legacy in this meaningful way by hearing from leaders in this field. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our friend, our colleague, the president of Brown University, Christina H. Paxson. Christina.
Thank you, Ron, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. It is really great to be here with all of you today. A very special collaborative event between the Warren Alpert Medical School and the Brown School of Public Health. This is actually our first in-person Levenger lecture since the fall of 2019. You all know why. And it's wonderful to be able to come together for this lecture, particularly in this year when, as Ron mentioned, we're celebrating 50 years of medicine at Brown. This is a wonderful place. There's so many exciting initiatives happening here in the medical school, in the School of Public Health, and across the university. And both of these great schools exemplify our commitment to advance health and well-being locally and globally. So thank you for being here tonight. So tonight we have the honor of hearing from an internationally recognized leader, somebody who I've never met before, but I've heard about for many years, and I'm delighted to meet with him. I did have the honor of delivering this lecture myself in 2015, and tonight I have a far easier task, and that's introducing our esteemed lecturer, Victor Zhao. So Dr. Zhao is president of the National Academy of Medicine, as well as vice chair of the National Research Council. He is also chancellor emeritus and the James B. Duke Professor of Medicine at Duke University, as well as the past president and CEO of the Duke University Health System, and many other things over the course of a career. I was hearing about how he and Mukesh, our dean, were colleagues at one point and have kept in touch over the years. A little bit of background: he was born in Shanghai, and he received his Bachelor of Science and his MD from McGill University in Montreal. And as one of the world's preeminent health leaders, he's advised governments and corporations and universities and people across the world. He's a leading cardiovascular scholar, and he's made a significant impact on health through his own research and scholarship in cardiovascular medicine, genetics, healthcare innovation. His seminal research laid the foundation for the development of angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitors. Until today, I didn't know what ACE inhibitor stood for, but now I know. And these are now used globally for the treatment of high blood pressure and congestive heart failure. He pioneered gene therapy for vascular disease, and he was the first to introduce DNA decoy molecules to block transcriptions as gene therapy in humans. So, you know, a distinguished career as a physician scientist. He's also been really important on policy issues, an important voice. Under his tenure at the National Academy of Medicine, he's advanced efforts to improve health equity, address racism, and he's received many honors and awards, including 16 honorary doctorates. So this evening, Dr. Zhao will speak to us about extending the health span with age, a case for social, scientific, and economic preparedness. So please join me in welcoming Victor Dzau. Thank you.
President Paxson, what a great privilege for me to be here. And Mukesh and Ron, just great friends. You know, when I think about Brown University, it's one of the top universities in the world. And when I think about Brown medicine, 50 years, you may know that National Academy of Medicine is also celebrating 50 years. And one other factoid, my wife and I just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary, just this first one. So you know why I chose this subject, right? Aging. But seriously, boy, when I looked at what's happened the last few years with recruitment of Mukesh Jain, Ashish Jha, I mean, it is quite impressive what you've done. And I think you've got some of the best people in health and medicine, public health, and that Brown is well poised to be the best, I think, in these areas. So congratulations. So I'm not an economist. So Mukesh invited me to give this talk. It's called Economics of Health, or Healthcare Economics. I said, I don't know much about economics, particularly if your president gave it in 2015. How am I going to be able to meet that performance? So I gave him a few topics. He said, well, you don't have to restrict yourself. So I gave him a few topics. But he chose this one, which is interesting. It's interesting for a number of reasons, because it is, in the case I'm making, there is an economic case in a big way. It's certainly close to my heart and a number of people who are certainly my age. But importantly, the Academy just put out a report on this particular topic. So that's what I'm going to talk about, making the case for really preparedness for an aging population. And that's both economic, social, health, of course, and scientific. So this is the key slide. We have a global aging population. If you look at the right-hand side of the slide, and you can see that green curve that goes upwards, that's people over 65. And you will see quickly that the world is aging. And in fact, by 2050, 20% of the global population, or more likely 1.6 billion, will be over 65. But that's not the end of the story. If you look at the other curve, which is blue going downwards, that's less than age 5. So it's obvious to you we have fewer younger people and more older people. And on the left-hand side of the slide shows you fertility rate, which is certainly going down everywhere. So now so you know what I'm set up to say. If you look at the demographic pyramid that shows at the bottom, in 1950, the globe had a real pyramid. A lot of people are younger, fewer and fewer people going upwards. But by 2020 and 2050, you can see that shape is taken quite dramatically different. What about our country? This is a curve that shows you the population over 65. Starting in 1950, there were 8%. We're now 21% of our population. That, in fact, is, by 2020, is 56 million older adults. And we expect, in fact, by 2030, not too far from now, 74 million. Now, we recognize, of course, this very special population is going to be there, but it's also very vulnerable. As shown on my last bullet, during COVID, 80% of deaths and people over 65. So it's really important to recognize that this population, we need to think about equity, about protection, and yet I make the case to you, a very special population that can contribute tremendously to our society. So what does that mean? So most people think about these demographic shifts as, wow, it's going to have impact in family structures, in social infrastructure, tremendous stress on social insurance, retirement programs, impact on housing, transportation, and of course, chronic diseases. Older people have twice higher NCDs than younger people. And that, of course, has, again, stress on healthcare delivery and financing. And ultimately, if you look at the numbers I showed you, you'll be worried about the workforce, right? There are fewer younger people, more older people. Let me take each one of this, just to build this a little bit more. So, there is, in fact, increasing life expectancy, and therefore, several generations can be all living simultaneously. You used to think about father and children, grandparents, grandchildren, now great-grandparents and children, all simultaneously living at about the same time, right? And so that's easy. For example, my mother-in-law is 94. I am, well, I tell you, you can guess my age. I've got children and I've got grandchildren. So 4 generations. So that's what we're seeing. More people are living much longer. But also, at the same time, while this is true, more families are choosing not to have children or fewer children, and there are more divorce rates in single parenting. So ultimately, while we could have multiple generations, the usual multi-generation households, as when I was growing up, are really decreasing. Meaning that my grandparents, my parents and I were living in the same place in Hong Kong, and these multi-generation, at least households, if not living in the same city, are getting less and less. So the implications are very obvious to you. I'm sure many of you have experienced an older parent or an older parent who needs help. And believe me, we all struggle by living in different cities and whole bit. So family size reduction means there's much less familial care available for the older sick population. And of course, we all know that, and I certainly, as an active clinician, I remember seeing a lot of patients where the patient comes in and the children are living totally elsewhere. So she'll come in and see me accompanied by a friend, and she's an elderly woman. And every so often, in a crisis, the son will show up from West Coast. So you can imagine that older individuals are certainly more socially isolated and also a lot more vulnerable. So what does that mean to midlife children? Well, when you think about this, I think about China. When you have one-child policy, when actually a married couple of 2 have to take care of 4 parents. And now if you think about our country, you would have children and parents, and so what's called the sandwich population have to be caregivers. So you can see there's a lot of implication from more traditional multi-generation household to where we're going and where we are today. The other thing is, as I already mentioned, number of workers is shrinking in our country. Now, good news for our country is we are open. Certainly, I know we're very open to immigration and others, people like myself, who came really as 18 years old to this country, first to Montreal and then to study. And the immigration has enabled us to keep a good demographic profile. But even in spite of that, you're having fewer people entering the workforce. So if you look at the ratio of workers to pensioners, we're now going from 3.5 in 2020, projected to 2.5 in 2060. That being said, that what they call old age dependent ratio is how you're measuring the number of older people's share of the workforce will also increase. So you can see the tensions everywhere as we look at the shifts, demographic shifts going forward. Wow, these are things which are just for me, to some extent, concerning if not heart-wrenching when you look at how many US people don't have much savings, retirement savings. Nearly half of US families have no retirement savings at all. And the median values is low for all ages, from $480 for families in the mid-30s to 17,000 families approaching retirement. That's simply not enough. You know that. And the lack of savings, they're more dependent on pensions for the income. And of course, Social Security is the most important source for seniors. But you can see these numbers. 30%, 37% of men, 40% women are dependent on Social Security, about 50% of income. And about 12% men and 50% women, 90% of their income, Social Security. And finally, if not the last, well, I think there's a few more points, is, of course, we know about chronic diseases. This slide illustrates vividly, with age, you have more infirmities, more chronic conditions. Well, if you look at 80% of people over 65 have at least one NCD, and 65%, 68 have more than one NCDs. And it's easily twice to three times the general population. It doesn't take any kind of imagination to imagine what that means to healthcare and the demand for healthcare, and of course the expenditure in the economic sense of healthcare. When we're now at 20% of our GDP, Medicare spending is going to go up to $1 trillion by 2023, next year. And Social Security will grow to 6%, exceed $1 trillion by 2050. And of course, we all know the trust fund is going to be depleted at some point or the other, and long-term care will more than double. And care could be as high as $2.5 trillion by 2030. These are astounding numbers. And I'm not an economist, and I haven't paid as much attention to this until we started doing the study and realizing what a big problem it is. And of course, medical costs is the key contributor debt of the older population, with 1 in 10 older adults having medical debt, and that's 4.5 million adults of 65 and older. And that medical debts are likely, those who have debts are less likely to see doctors or to refill their prescriptions. So we have a real problem. Now, most people think about this, and I think it's somewhat derogatory when saying it's a silver tsunami. But because we're not thinking about the other side of the equation, when we think about older person, they're frail, they're more vulnerable. But I look at this audience, I look at myself, clearly over 65, and there are many, many people who are healthy and able to contribute. So I think we need to think about how to create healthier, longer life. Longevity is a reality now. I mean, I just told you my mother, my mother-in-law, my father all lived in the 90s. And living to 100 is not impossible biologically. And certainly in your generation, younger, I can see that happening. The real question is, would you live healthier? Healthy to be productive, to be able to have good cognitive function, and to contribute to society. So I think there's real value in healthy longevity, not just longevity. This is about health span over lifespan. And here I'm showing you some of the real evidence-based value of healthy older population, adults. Full life course and many intrinsic assets. Certainly, I believe, and data show that we have more expertise, more experience, and of course, more social, emotional capabilities. Certainly, I feel that way because I was younger, I was a lot less patient. And The nurses used to call me Dr. Stat. Everything I've done right away. And now as my stage and looking over a large organization, I realize about human interaction, the ability to have more understanding of the challenge people face. So wisdom is a really important issue. More cognitive skill, solving more complex problems. We may not be remembered as well as many younger people do, but I still feel that I can help by solving problems. And of course, this is a significant market too, in the economic sense. Right now it's contributing 7% of GDP, and I'll show you that it can even be a lot more. I think that if we have healthy longevity, it gives the young people optimism. Oh wow, living older is not bad. In fact, look at how much we can really benefit from being older. And of course, there are many assets at a scale, if you think about the number of older people, that we never thought of before. Now, I want to tell you a few evidence, and these are really based on scientific studies. First of all, aging is not about needs. Actually, we bring assets of immense value and potential value. And many people say, okay, if older people stay in the job, are we displacing younger people? Lots of evidence show that generations are not in competition, particularly if you look at the numbers I showed you, where there's a need for workforce. But older people can benefit younger people by having intergeneration teams working together, having someone with more experience and having someone with more wisdom. And yet younger people have a lot more energy, a lot more intuition. I think that blend has been shown to be extremely effective. And of course, designing anything for older adults should be good for all ages. When you talk about whether it's the digital technology, you name it. And I really believe that older people are more committed to the future. The whole idea of pay it forward stage of life. Many of us are at that stage. So I think the real question is, we believe in all this. Are we making the older population healthier? Are we, society, prepared to address many of the things I talked about, which is social protection, financial protection, so it can lead a healthy life? If you look at the two major studies from the CSIS Global Age Preparedness Index and Help Age International Watch Index, the answer is no. Certainly not in the US. We don't hear a lot of people talking about older population. I'm very active in Singapore. They are actually talking about this, but I think very few countries really have real kind of preparedness for this aging population. And while some countries can do well in one dimension, they do poorly in the others. So I think there's a real need now for us to wake up, to say this is facing us, and we now want our country, our society to be productive. We need to really think about how to address the issue of health and longevity. In that context, I think there's a need to build on reports and studies to look at what's needed in the future. And already there's a number of efforts in WHO and the Association for American Retired People, AARP, to look at this. But we thought as National Academy we should take this on. And this is how I arrived at this issue. One of the years, this is about 5+ years ago, when I was holding a President's Forum, I surveyed my members to say, what are the big issues in health that we should think about? The top two are health equity and aging. So I decided that I'll have a forum of discussing about aging, and it turns out that they're so rich in this area that we thought we should take this on as a grand challenge. So we have decided to do, therefore, a grand challenge in health and longevity, because grand challenge allows you to mobilize public-private partnership and think bold ideas where to go in the future. In this regard, we launched the grand challenge 3 years ago. You can see that we at our National Academy's building, we brought together people from everywhere after 2 years of planning of what a grand challenge could be. And the grand challenge has two components. One is the roadmap, which is a comprehensive assessment of the challenges and opportunities presented by global aging internationally, but obviously contextualized to the US as well, and look at promising solutions. What does society need to do to prepare for an older population? What are ways to improve health, productivity, and quality of life? The other one is to activate science, because we truly believe that through science and innovation that you can bring in new ways of helping healthy longevity. So we want to increase research, entrepreneurism, and extend Healthspan and build an ecosystem of research and support in this area. So those are two areas. So I'm going to begin first talk a little more detail what we believe our report is saying we should be thinking about or doing. And to begin with, the task for the commission we put together, which is an international commission, I'll show you in a few minutes, is to say, how do you strengthen communities and enrich lives of older people? Explore and recommend approaches that enhancing structures, systems, and environment. A system-level approach. Second is to think about, identify and catalyze approaches and reforms that we need for our society and country to look at entire spectrum of system and institutions, innovative age-related research, and importantly, global initiative to coordinate with other countries to look at how it can really make a difference. So we had a roadmap which is co-chaired by Linda Fried from Colombia and John Wong from Singapore, and it covers 6 continents and 8 different countries with expertise not only in health, but in economics, in policy, in social sciences, and others. And you may recognize many of these names, but I won't have time to go over them. It's overseen by an international oversight board. So this is truly international. Co-chaired by myself and John Jenkins, who is the CEO of AARP, and Keizo Takemi from Japan, who's the major parliamentarian in Japan. So again, truly an international group that oversee the conduct of this research. First, the benefits and importance of health longevity. I have made my case, but I'll say this again. The Commission defines health longevity as state in which years in good health approach the biologic lifespan. So importantly, it is physical, mental, and social well-being. Well-being across the entire population, not just mental, not just physical, but all of this. So it's not about living longer now, health longevity, it's about living healthier, more productive lives, whatever our age. So this concept of health span is key. So I'm not talking about only health for the older population, because health starts much earlier in the lifespan. So the entire life's course of health span is what we're talking about. So that applies to younger people, it applies to, middle-aged people and NCDs in improving the health altogether. And there are many economic upsides to popular aging since we are talking about economy. Certainly it represents opportunity for every industry. When you think about what we're putting forward in iPhones and social media, it's all geared towards the younger population. But you just recall the size of the older population. And so therefore, what we call a silver market that can give you a global value, which is actually assessed at $15 trillion by 2020. Well, already at that number now, so substantial. So there, in fact, are lots of things we can do in focusing on older population, which can also be used for the younger population. So the committee has a vision to say by 2050, we'd like to see all people globally enabled to have longer lives with health and function, and they're able to engage in meaningful and productive activities and bring their social capital to society, contributing to GDP and well-being and social cohesion. And that all of society benefits from contribution of the older adults. And equity is so important that we need to think about everyone in this population because there are many people who are living, in fact, in poverty and much more challenged situation. Now, so this is the concept, what we call a virtuous cycle. If you look at health longevity on the top, it's about individual and societal health and well-being and productive engagement. And that increases human capital, that allows you to have more resources, to have enablers that can increase health longevity. And those enablers are work, social, physical, health systems, and science. But you can see in the upper right circle, there are many disruptors of ageism, of being sick, having social determinants which are poor, poverty, having climate pollutants, and conflicts and inequity that can disrupt health longevity. And so the report really focused on who do we need to act, where we need to act. What you see here are all the actors. It's really an all of society and all of government approach. Again, in Singapore, they have taken this on as an all of society, all of government approach. So not one ministry is responsible. All ministries are working together, whether in transportation, agriculture, health, to look at how to create a society that supports the older population, and in so doing, clearly supports all populations. So I've listed here everybody, really, private sector, multilateral organizations, government, individual and families, community, and of course, researchers. So there are 5 domains that we believe need to be acted on and look at as application or recommendations. Social infrastructure, physical environment, health systems, education, work environment, and science, technology, innovation. I'm going to talk about each one of this in the next part of my talk. So if you look at social infrastructure, these are the areas that need to be addressed. Social determinants, just like we look at the entire population social determinants, the older adults are more subject to influence, because if you live in a household that's poor, we visited patients who live in a walk-up, multi-step walk-up, older patients who can hardly be mobile, live in the dusty area and have asthma. You can imagine how these things affect their health tremendously. So under social determinants is so important. There's also ageism and age discrimination, particularly as it relates to work and other environment. Inclusion of social inclusion. I talk about the isolation. Financial security, and of course, digital literacy. So much of what we do now is dependent on the digital technology. So the goal of this whole area is to look at how do you create social cohesion by augmented by intergeneration connections, the old and the young, to work together and engage them, the older people, not in isolation, but with family, community, and society levels. And secondly is to give them social protection and financial security that can mitigate their vulnerability at older ages. So what does that mean? Well, to do that, you really have to think about what are the laws and policies? What about pensions, social protection systems? What about individual savings and financial literacy? I'm sure you all know about how much scamming and others are in the older people who are unable to care for their own finances. Access to banking systems, investment opportunities, and important multi-generational policy and action. So we have the 3 recommendations. First, there's a real need for evidence-based strategies for reducing ageism against any age group, whether young or old, but ageism is out of the window. We need to look at people as they are, what they're able to do, versus judging them by their age. Secondly, is government should start developing plans, so in this country, for ensuring basic financial security for older people. And to improve financial security in retirement, government and employers together have to have strategies for financial literacy and protecting pensions and lifelong savings. Now, it's easy for me to say, but it's really important now for us to think about how to do this. Physical environment. It's a lot more important than you imagine. I gave the example of an elderly woman who have to live up in a walk up many stairs that she's not able to mobile. But if you think about this, your ecosystem, the natural and built environments where you have physical activities, where you have lifestyle, things like that are so important. And believe it or not, 24% of death and disease, as we have the pie graph of healthcare being 10% for outcomes, 24% can be linked to environmental hazards. Huge. So what are those targets? Housing, public space, because again, in many places, when you think about designing public space for older and young people to get physical exercise, safety and transportation, think about getting to, and I think about my late mother, how difficult it was to get her to anything, and arranging transportation to visit a doctor. So all those things are so important. Digital technologies, being able to be connected, and of course, environment, which are climate change, environmental hazards. So the whole goal of this second area is to say we need physical environment infrastructure to support function engagement of adult of all ages. In this regard, I think we have done poorly in designing space, and other places have done, including the older people, to co-design and user-centered design of built environment. Again, using an example, I met with the chair of the Housing Board of Singapore. They said, oh yeah, we are designing housing. They have a lot of public housing more than we have, where it's multi-generational. So we put the older people in the lower floors and the younger people, but then they're all in the same housing area to be interacting. We are having smart enabled technology for the older adults so that they can actually be able to get the assistance that they want. And we're designing space for intergeneration to interact, have activities together. So when you start designing this, you need to get engagement of all generations and think about what's the best way to design that's most productive and that promotes social cohesion and connection with physical activity. And of course, I already talked about food, transportation, social services. Now, Uber has been, to me, a real innovation. And the use of Uber more effectively, using social services to help people transport, is going to be critically important. And of course, mitigate environment emergencies. Physical environment recommendations, so we say this has to happen as a government and private sector together to co-design these physical spaces. At the city level, city planning is so important. As you know, when you think about health and city design, you think about bike lanes, transportation, being able to get people to the healthcare facility they need. But I think at this level of climate change environment is key. At neighborhood level, of course, you want to think about what I just talked about in intergeneration, connection, cohesion. At the home level, affordability, and of course, having sufficient housing, autonomy, and social connection. Broadband access. You know, I live in Durham, North Carolina, where's my home. During COVID, I've been very involved with the school system, and 50% of families actually have no broadband access, which is really amazing. We went through a whole effort in actually raising money and getting to corporations to give enough, devices. And even then, we have to use hotspots and ways to get connected. And, younger people are having education issues. Older people need this in many ways for connection. And of course, public transportation options. So this being a discussion on economy, I want to show you some ROIs. So if you look at the study by Tsenga et al., they look at housing and supports reducing, in this case for us, emergency department visits, hospital stays. They estimate you can generate return investment for every dollar spent, $1.557 in savings. So who do we need to talk to say this is the right thing to do? Right? You can say, let's do more studies. Absolutely. But I think that many of the investments are short-sighted in what's needed, but this, in fact, is important. And broadband investment, as you can show, doubling broadband speed can result in 0.3% addition to GDP for having impacts on household middle, and this kind is low, middle, and high-income countries. And of course, health systems. We know that elderly have chronic conditions. We need a strong public health system. We need healthcare delivery and long-term care. And of course, we need workforce, and there are not enough workforce to understand how to work with older populations. And of course, we need a lot more science and geoscience technology and innovation. So the goals of this particular segment is to integrate public health, social science, patient-centered care. I just published a paper in Lancet, just online, and the title of the paper is, Has Traditional Medicine Had Its Day? The point is, we train as physicians to focus on one patient and disease at a time. That's all good, and we should continue. But we need to understand that if we're ever going to address the issues of NCDs, chronic disease, and even COVID, we need to work closely with public health in coordination of their work in the community, extending our work to the community, and importantly, sharing data with public health in a place like Brown, where you have such great assets to work in integrated fashion. So I think for the older population, integration, public health, social service, and healthcare is critical, and long-term care for the older adults. And of course, long-term care systems are so important so that they can receive the care that they need. Now, we have just published a study on the American long-term care system, and you all know it's badly broken. It needs to be continually redone. So our recommendation is investment in public health system and building collective actions to promote health and population level, and focus on disease care to prevention and health longevity, and to reform healthcare systems for government and researchers and system to look at strategies to make long-term care a lot more culturally sensitive and equitable and all together. And what's the ROI on this? Well, we did a systematic review of 52 studies looking at public health intervention, in this case in the United States and high-income countries. The ROI is 14-1. Now, during COVID, as you know, we have now many studies to talk about how broken our public health system is. CDC is held out to be one of the best in the world, and yet CDC is probably insufficient. It's under-resourced. Everybody knows that during COVID, they used fax machine initially as a way to communicate. So it's outdated, insufficient resource and workforce. But many of public health are at the state level, at the local level. I'm sure that in Providence you have a city Department of Health. And the lack of coordination and integration is one of the biggest problems. So we need to invest and create a reformation of public health in the system to be much better integrated. And of course, WHO shows that if you were to do interventions such as tobacco, alcohol legislation, salt reduction, violence prevention, there's tremendous savings and improvement in health. The fourth area is work, volunteering, and lifelong education. We call it the Longevity Dividend. And here, you're talking about the economic benefits of having older people living longer and volunteer longer. That depends on social infrastructure, but also lifelong learning, education, training for the older population. In this regard, when you look at work and retirement, I have already made the case, and I think there's evidence that older people bring strength to workplace. But when they're not healthy, they're likely to be the one that go into unemployment and or disability pension. So keeping people healthy will bring strength to the workplace, but also remove barriers such as age discrimination and create incentive to retain older people when they can still work longer. And I think the other important area is volunteerism. A lot of older people have time to volunteer. And I do know that, including myself, volunteer in my grandchildren's school to read to them, that actually creates purpose in life and provides value for older people to be valued, to put their wisdom. But more importantly, data shows that when you, in fact, have volunteer activities, it actually improves cognitive function, it reduces depression, and improves actually happiness among the older population. So we need to have more programs that allow older people to volunteer. And finally, lifelong learning. I'm sure all of you know that, certainly me, when I first started learning, the internet did not exist. I have to learn a lot of things. So I think learning is not just when you're off to college, you're done medical school, it's lifelong learning. And for all the population, lifelong learning can help you adjust and therefore get extra skills to move to the next level so that when you're older, maybe you can't do as many manual labor, but you can certainly use a lot more cognitive labor. So secondary education, vocational training, and higher education. So this recommendation is design work environments and policy encourage older people to remain in the workforce. Now, obviously retirement age becomes an issue, right? We have 65 retirement in many places. I'm sure University of Brown has said no longer have retirement ages, but still there are lots of fixed because you are now eligible for pensions, Medicare, Social Security. So the question is, how can we make this happen, that people want to work longer, are able longer, can stay longer, and not lose the opportunity to reap the benefits of their years of function. So in our report, we talk about this, having a more flexible system, not to take away from the benefits, but to enable people who want to work to continue to work versus a forced retirement. And of course, importantly, we have to prioritize in lifelong learning and training. And many corporations are now doing this. And I think it's certainly for the benefit of the companies. Finally, science and innovation. There's no question, whatever we talk about, this plays a key role. Because number one, the biologic process associated with aging is getting more and more information. If we're able to intervene those processes, we're able to either delay illness and to increase sort of the health span. That's critical. Second, of course, is technology. Technology can assist elderly to do what they need to do and can be therefore a lot more mobile, being able to do a lot more things. So I think it's a combination of doing great science and also enabling technology. So when you look at the biology of aging, I was talking to Mukesh earlier, I went to a celebration of Buck Institute of 30 years, and they look back and, there are a lot of people who work on aging research. A lot of people may work on geriatric research of how to care for elderly. That's important. But very few people say, if I go on the campus, maybe not at Brown, what do you work on? I work on cancer, cardiovascular, brain. Hardly anybody say I work on aging. That is a huge opportunity to make a huge difference. Look at what I just listed. The kind of work that's been done here by Healthspan and others to understand molecular pathways, sirtuin activators, senescent cells, and the impact of senescent cells on the other functions, inflammation. There's a whole field of senescent treatment, telomere, the length of telomere and the dysfunction, mitochondrial DNA, longevity genes, epigenetics, cellular regeneration, and importantly, the really exciting thing recently is partial cell reprogramming. Belmonte showed that you can take the Yamanaka factors, put it into a mature cell and reset the clock to a younger cell, not only in cell, but in animals, and actually reduce chronic diseases. So suddenly this area is booming, and there are now foundations and many other organizations supporting research. So this is an exciting area. And more importantly, equally importantly, is transformational technology. Emergency response pendants, smart pill boxes, GPS tracking device, telehealth, but emerging are robotics that can help older people, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, so that the over 65, the age 85 individual can use simply a cell phone to help them assist in making decisions or do many other issues. So I think by bringing these technologies together, it would be great. I mentioned earlier that we have a second part of our grand challenge. This is what it is. So with a whole bunch of people who are very energized by this idea, we launched a global competition in health longevity. It's a prize program. As you can see, the whole idea is to get a movement, get younger people, entrepreneurs into this field, to think about digital, engineering, or biological, or social, what we can do in changing the field of aging to improve physical, mental, and social well-being. So we are looking for any innovative ideas. It doesn't have to be restricted by the field and open to innovation in sector. So we have raised a lot of money, and this is what it looks like. We have phase one called Catalyst. We're giving out, based on the Gates Foundation Grand Challenge, the late Tachi Yamada, who pushed for this idea. When he was at Gates, he says, $50,000, take bold ideas, 2-page application, no preliminary data needed. We just want to see how good the idea is. Failures, yes, but success, wow. If it's bold, it can really make a difference. So we've given out $50,000 awards for these starters. The ones who have gained this Catalyst Award is eligible to receive the next level, anywhere from $200,000 to $1 million or more, called Accelerator. This is supported by European Investment Bank, Johnson & Johnson Labs, and others to enable this great idea to move to the next level. We take no intellectual property. This is for the scientists. And then we have raised now enough money to give grand prize that we hope to launch in 2050 for the breakthrough that's come through this. Now, this is a global movement. So I use my Rolodex, and I send many of my friends, and I meet with them across the world, and we got a dozen sponsors from different countries. Academia of Taiwan, Japan Agency for AMED, which is NIH equivalent, Chinese Academy of Medical Sciences, Chinese University of Hong Kong, and University of Hong Kong, the European Union, the European Innovation, Technology, and Health, Singapore, Chile, China, UK Research Innovation, NIH or NIA, of course, and then we raised a lot of money. So all told, we're covering 50 countries and territories, and we're now in our third round, an average of 1,200 to 1,500 applications per year. Globally, we've given out 450 awards, and we started, and we just had our summit where these young entrepreneurs from anywhere from looking at retinal scanning of AI to looking at epigenetics and markers to really get going on this. And so we're very excited about the approach. So let me end by saying, I do think that this is a really important issue, a defining issue of our time. Time is now for a whole movement in health longevity. And it needs an all-of-society approach, as shown in this. And we need to prevent the disruptors and enable the enablers to go forward with a social impact that addresses social cohesion and equity. Because the cost of inaction is much greater than the cost of poor health, financial burden, loss of opportunities. I hope I made that case to you. So you may ask me, what next? We have a report, so our job is to really disseminate this report. So this report released on June the 3rd, And we have been in Singapore in August to launch this report in the Asian area. The Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore was there to open the meeting and stayed through the whole morning. We have leadership from across Asia and government leaders to be there. We are launching the next meeting in DC called Summit in November 2022, where we have members of Senate and House joining us, as well as agencies, as well as researchers, talk about how to move forward. We are taking the report to many different audiences. Thank you for inviting me today to have a chance to have this report to Gerontology Society of America and other meetings. And we're having a series of regional summits, ASEAN and OECD countries. Part of the things we're going to do is convert the report into what we call Meeting in the Box, an online tool or paper kit so people can say what needs to be done, particularly in the community, and being able to apply them. Certainly, we're writing publication op-eds. We're going to have a paper coming in Nature Medicine and others on this. And of course, we now begin to set up collaboration with WHO, the World Economic Forum, which they have, in fact, a Global Futures Council I co-chair, and Health Longevity, and Help Age International, where we're going to take it down to different countries to implement them. So I hope that in my time allotted, I've given you this importance of health longevity and what we need to do. There's a lot to be done. But if you take a step back and hear what I said, actually it's not only for the older population. It's for a much better society we need to live in. We have a lot of work to do and look forward to having a good conversation. Thank you.
Let's see if this is on. I don't think you can hear me. It's not that bad. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Dzau. That was absolutely magnificent. We still have to read the report, right? We have to read the whole report in its entirety, despite this presentation. All 400 pages. All 400 pages, yeah. But you got the Cliff Notes version today, so it's really great. We have certainly time for questions, and as people are thinking about it, we have 2 microphones that will get to you. And maybe I can start, and sort of touches on the last comment that you had, and I was thinking about this, and if it's in the report or if it's something that you and the leadership of this report would view as important. But you talked about, right at the end, you said this is important for the elderly, but it's actually important for much earlier in life: social isolation, social infrastructure, physical infrastructure. And as I look back, and probably like many here, our social milieu, isolation, interactions were so different when we were younger. You grew up in Asia, but even growing up in the U.S., the social infrastructure was different. Today you have iPhones, and certainly young people are very isolated, I think, at times. The other is physical infrastructure, just physical activity, which was, you had physical education every day. And now that's not necessarily the case. And I just wonder if your group if you would agree the importance of that starting really across the lifespan. And number 2, given the perch that you have, if that is something that is important to communicate forcefully, publicly, starting really from childhood onwards.
Yeah, I think we're all recognizing, certainly in people who are in healthcare, the importance of social, economic, environment, and what we call social determinants. So there's no question about this. You already laid out why this is so important, right? As I think about this, certainly during COVID, social isolation for the younger person, for the older population has been devastating. Stress and mental health, and many other areas. I'm sure President Paxson will tell you when the students come back how exciting it was, because they left in the middle of the year and never had a chance to say goodbye to anybody and graduated without even a ceremony, right? Maybe virtually. I gave the Brown University commencement address. I was supposed to be 2020. I gave it in 2021. But boy, 10,000 people came back. So I think social isolation is a real issue. And you talk about also social media. And of course, that is also a big issue, particularly younger people. So we need to encourage a lot more kind of positive interaction, to be sure. And of course, when we think about the elderly, this is particularly a big problem in social isolation and depression during the time of COVID. So when I talk about maybe some of the social, physical environment issues, I think it's really of understanding that first, social determinants are important, we need to address them. And second is physical environment are important, and we need to address them. So those, both of them, and how to enable this to happen. I think that's a fundamental issue in my mind. I've written about the fact that people talk a lot about health equity. I don't think there's health equity without social equity. So we really have to understand when you're looking at people, you know, as a doctor, I say, okay, Mrs. So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, where do you live? Let me understand how I can help you. Let me bring social services. I'm not doing enough. I think our responsibility is that we need to do more to change our society. That societal issues are our issues as well. Because by having more social equity, not only is the right thing to do, but we also enable people to have better health equity.
Thank you. That was very broad and thought-provoking. I guess what I have is a practical question. I mean, those are really big ideas, important big ideas. They're going to be important, big, and expensive ideas. They may have investment returns, but we're currently living in a society where anytime a really big idea comes out there, it seems like, at least in this country, it's almost immediately partitioned off to one political side or the other, and it becomes a good idea on one side and a terrible idea on the other side. Since something like this is really going to require consensus in order to really make progress, how do you look at our whole social media environment where things get so divided so quickly?
Yeah. Well, Lou, I think our hope definitely is this is an independent, neutral, non-political report. What needs to be done? That's the first step. When I read the report from a commission of course I work with them, I say, wow, you're really asking us to fix a lot of things, no question. But I think our job, number one, is to identify those things, right? Number two is how to mobilize the support for it. And I think our starting point, as I said in my last slide, is we got to socialize this issue. And I think that I'm going to guess in this audience, majority will resonate with what I said, right? It's a big idea. How do we do it, right? So that's the second point. You really got to have a movement of people believing this is the good thing to do. Third is that we have, at least in this country, positioned ourselves to think about what about Congress? What about the agencies? Now, many of you know the National Academies was founded in 1863 by Abraham Lincoln and Congress as an independent advisor. So we're really there, in which Congress and agencies do listen to us. They know that our reports are independent, not political. Whether they act on it or not is another issue. So our job is to look through how to get champions, right? Champions issues. So there is an Asian committee in the Senate, and there are others. So we're getting all of them together to discuss this. It's going to take some while. Then finally, that if you have enlightened leadership, executive order can make certain things happen, right? And that's a little more political. So I guess the best answer I can give you would be that, you know, you have a starting point. Now, many of the things I talk about is not all federal. They're state and local. So you can do a lot of things. I mean, I would be delighted if you want me to come with you to your state legislature if we had such an audience to talk about, and maybe a better package. I gave a much broader talk. about certain things that can be done, I won't be surprised if there are people who say, wow, I get it. You know, it's interesting because I was in a meeting actually in Davos, and here the American delegation from Congress were there. There were 12 of them. What struck me is, number one, there was one woman, and secondly is, I would say more than half of them were over 65. There's some quite old senators there. And so I think this has to resonate with them. But I understand your point, right? I mean, we have to start somewhere, and I look at your previous speakers about all the inequity. We're still struggling with all those, but we have to call it out.
All right, we have time for one more question, and if we can just get the microphone over.
I too enormously enjoyed your talk, thank you. And I think you've given us a considerable list of things to do. And I fear I'm not really helping you by offering maybe one additional thing that needs to be done.
Okay.
The reason that those of us who are here, of course, are here because we love our work. And therefore we enjoy continuing to work and enjoying the longevity. I fear that one of the additional things we may need to do is to organize education such that the majority of the inhabitants of the country adore their work too and do not see 65 as, thank God, the age I can stop working.
Yes. I think you raised a really important point. When we talk about working and retirement, you know, clearly people point out to me and say, I worked all my life. This is money that I have earned, and I need to now retire and stop working. Now, whereas you say, hey, I want to keep working. If you even pay me less, I'll work, like me. So I think there's a clear issue there. But I think enjoyment of work and changing work environment is really important. May I say something? Sure. I just think that Brown is so well positioned for all these issues. Let me say why. On the science part, I was telling Mukesh, the amount of investment in science in healthy aging is going to explode. We know that, for example, the Smith, Eric Schmidt, their foundation, been talking to me about what do we need to do geroscience? We need to do more. NIA's budget has doubled and tripled, although mainly in Alzheimer's, but still. And there's a new foundation called Evolution that's got $1 billion to look at health longevity. And also, you have organizations like Altos, which is $1 billion investment dollars to look at how to move some of those science towards application. You have Calico, companies that's now focused on this. I think science is going to explode because of how we've just seen some of the advances. You have a strong aging research department, and that's really, there are not too many universities who are organized around aging research itself. It may be, a byproduct of something else. Secondly is that, I keep thinking about my experience in Singapore, where I've now worked for 15 years. We started a medical school there from Duke, and I'm very involved with them. The size of a population and enlightened legislation can really make things work. Then you can really prove that you can have, whether it's aging or population health, that you can bring together the pieces, right? And health and science, healthcare delivery, public health, you name it. So that's a real opportunity for something to be done here. I'm very excited for you.
Well, that is a great way to end. Thank you so much, Richard. And I'm going to invite everyone upstairs, third floor, for a reception. If you want physical activity, which we know is very important, you can take the steps up, but there are elevators if you're inclined to go that way. Thanks for being here. That was great.